This book is called The Story of Pocahontas. It was written by Karen Jenner. Pocahontas was a Native American girl who lived 400 years ago in Virginia. Of course, it wasn't called Virginia then, and she was here when the first people from England arrived in ships. They had sailed all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. The setting of our story is along the James River in Virginia. Pocahontas became friends with the English, and she helped make sure her people did not attack them. I think the story of her life is just as exciting as any make-believe story. Have any of you ever seen the movie Pocahontas? You'll see that the real story is not quite the same. In my opinion, I think that the real story is more interesting than the movie. Alright, before we get started, I want to talk about some of the important places and people names that are in the story so you can kind of know where they came from. Now, this is a map that looks more like the maps they would have had back then, okay? Our maps that we look at look a little different, but I thought it'd be fun to look at one like this. Alright, so some people you may hear in the book is, of course, Pocahontas. Can you say that name? Pocahontas. I'm going to type it out. Pocahontas, okay? There's her name, and it needs to have a capital letter because it's a name. Alright, and so Pocahontas came from over here, okay? This would be the New World is what they called that. That's where we live today. In fact, down here was probably where they were trying to map out Florida, and we live right around in here. Now, Pocahontas came from Virginia, or we call Virginia now. They called it Jamestown back then, and it was somewhere in here along the river, okay? Now, Pocahontas was part of a Native American tribe called the Powhatans. Make sure I got all kinds of crazy letters going on there, don't I? Powhatans, we call them Native Americans now, but back then, settlers you might hear them called Indians sometimes, because the settlers who came over thought that they were in India, which is actually down here. Okay, so they thought that they were in India, but really they had gotten to America, into North America. Okay, and they thought that they looked kind of like Indians because they had a little bit darker skin and dark hair, and they just assumed that's where they had gone, but that really wasn't where they were. So over in Jamestown is where the Powhatan lived and Pocahontas. Okay, now you'll also hear these friends named in the story. The first one is John Smith, not James Smith, John Smith. Can you say that? And John Smith was a kind of like an explorer. He was from England, okay, which was over here. And they sailed across the ocean to come over here to the New World, okay? So John Smith is one friend that you'll hear that came from England. Another one is John Rolfe. So there's two Johns in this story. There's John Smith and John Rolfe, and they both came from England and sailed over to the New World. Okay, another person that you may hear is King James. Can you say that? He was the king of England at that time. Okay, so we know he definitely belongs over here on the England side, right? Now, John Smith and John Rolfe both traveled over to the New World, over to Jamestown. And eventually you'll hear that Pocahontas travels back over the ocean back to England, okay? So that kind of just helps you think about where all these people are coming from. And when they talk about the Powhatan, we're over here. Pocahontas came from the New World where we live today. And then John Smith and John Rolfe and King James are all over in England. Now, John Smith and John Rolfe do come over to the New World, okay? This book is just like a fantasy story, but the cool thing is that this story really happened. The author will tell us the events in the order that they happened, one after another. We call it a sequence of events. As I read, you can help to remember what happened in the right order. At the end of our story, we'll talk about some of the things that we've heard so far. Look right here at this sidebar. It's showing us a picture of a map similar to what we just looked at. It says, a long journey. The first settlers took 5 months to sail from England to America. They arrived in April of 1607. We can also see a Native American pointing to the ships in the distance. He looks excited. Let's see what he says. I saw pale strangers. A hunter returned to the Indian village shouting the news. They're building a town. The word pale means skin that's light in color. Now, have the ships landed yet? Not yet, right? How do we know? We can see them way off in the distance. Do you see them in the picture? Pocahontas ran to listen. Isn't it exciting, Father? Said Pocahontas. Her father, Chief Powhatan, frowned. We shall see. Now, why isn't her father excited? He probably doesn't know why they're coming. He might be afraid they're coming to take their land or hurt them. Powhatan sent Pocahontas and a group of scouts to the stranger's town. They walked silently, hiding among the trees. Everything about the settlers was strange. Some even had hair on their faces. Bravely, Pocahontas stepped forward and greeted them with a smile. A hairy-faced man smiled back. Scouts are people that are sent to find out what's happening. Why do you think they hid in the trees? Probably so that they couldn't see them just in case something bad happened, right? Why do you think that the Native Americans were surprised by the men's hairy faces? That just means that they had beards, right? Well, you may not know this, but most Native Americans can't grow hair on their faces, and so they weren't used to seeing people with hair on their faces. And when the English came, the settlers came, they were surprised by the hair all over their face because they had never seen anyone with hair on their face. Pocahontas made many visits to the settlers' town. She learned that the smiling man with the hairy face was Captain John Smith. The settlers were from England. They called their new home Jamestown after their ruler, King James. Sometimes Pocahontas brought food for the hungry settlers. They knew many things, but they did not know how to grow corn. Why do you think that the English didn't know how to grow corn? Well, the book doesn't say, but the answer is that corn is not native to Europe. That means it doesn't grow in Europe where they came from. So that means that Pocahontas had to teach them how to grow corn that could grow here. Pocahontas liked the settlers, but many Indians did not. Chief Powhatan held a meeting. The pale strangers mean trouble, he told his people. If we attack them, they will go away. Father, let's be friends with them, said Pocahontas. Strangers take our land, said Powhatan. They cannot be trusted. Look at this sidebar. This one tells us about Pocahontas' father, Chief Powhatan. It says, Pocahontas' father, Powhatan, was chief of more than 14,000 Indians. His tribes lived in many nearby villages. Alright guys, we're going to stop our story there today, okay? And we'll read the rest tomorrow. I'm so excited. I love this story. Pocahontas was my favorite movie when I was growing up, but I think I like the real story of Pocahontas even more. She was such an amazing person, and you'll find out why in just tomorrow, actually. But let's review some of the names of the people and the places that we heard in our story again. So we know that the Indians, Pocahontas and Powhatan, they lived over here. Close to the settlement of Jamestown, right? Over in what is now Virginia in America where we live. And we've heard about John Smith. We've just met him in our story. He was a settler that came from England all the way over. So now he's over here. Let's move him over here. That'd be fun. Okay. So John Smith came over and Pocahontas met him. Remember, he had that hairy face. Okay. And now I want to talk about some of the things that we've heard that have happened so far. These are our key details in our story. All right, so first we saw the Indians saw the ships, right? The Native Americans saw the ships coming, and they really didn't know what to think. Pocahontas was excited, but her father wasn't very excited. So they sent out some scouts, right? And here they are in the trees, and then Pocahontas went to kind of find out what was happening, and she met the settlers there. That's where she met John Smith, and then she learned that they didn't really know how to grow corn. So she would take them corn and help them learn how to grow corn because they didn't grow that where they come from in England. Tomorrow we will read some more. Look at all the exciting things that are going to happen in our story. All right, I can't wait to hear the rest.